This is the Kaleido M6 roaster, an electric coffee roaster that has a lot going for it, both for home use for enthusiasts or as a sample roaster for a small coffee roastery. So how good is this roaster really? Let's find out. If you're watching this video, you'll probably already be interested in coffee roasting, so I'm not going to go over beginner roasting technique. I've already done that in another video that you can watch here, for general roasting tips, and I'll have a live stream walkthrough roasting on this, so I can slow it all down for you and talk through my process for getting quality coffee out of this roaster. I also really want to thank Joe from Espresso Outlet for sending me this roaster for review. Check the description from where you can pick up one if you want to do that after watching this video, and I'll also leave a link for some of my roasted coffee down there. So the Kaleido series of roasters seem to be directed mostly at home users with the M1 and M2, and then the M6 and M10 models can be used for roasting at home or sample and experimental roasting, and even small-scale commercial roasting. I'm not going to talk much about the look because it's a personal preference thing, but I think they look badass. Literally, my first thought was that it looked like one of those house robots from Robot Wars. It's awesome, just awesome. A little childish maybe, but awesome, and I'm never going to apologize for this look. There are 3 versions of each one available: the Kaleido system, the Artisan system, and the Dual system, the last of which lets you use both. I've got the Dual system M6, and I've used both systems with it extensively in the past few months, and my first recommendation is going to be going with the Artisan system, which connects over Bluetooth. Artisan's just better and a more convenient way to log your roasts, replicate them, and easily access more data and information, and it can grow with your understanding of roasting and any other machine that you use. It's easy enough for a beginner with a little bit of setup, and if I'm honest, the included Kaleido tablet is just not great and feels a little bit cheap, which is a shame because just about everything else feels well thought out and properly machined. The resolution is pretty low, and it uses a capacitive touchscreen that you need to press down on pretty hard, which is not ideal for quickly changing your power or fan speed during a roast. Artisan is definitely the way to go. Probably the biggest thing going for these roasters is the price. The M6 goes for just under $2,600 US, which is not all that much for what's on offer at this scale. The M10 is more than $500 cheaper than the Kaleido Bullet, which is a very popular and also pretty reasonably priced small batch roaster. This kind of competition is great because it brings prices down and gives more choices for home roasters like you and me. So I'll go through each function one by one and highlight the good and the bad as I go through. This hopper is where you load the beans in, and while the bean chute looks a little flimsy, I haven't had any issues with it at all. And the hopper system slides the beans in nicely with a little help. Once I open the chute, that's when the roast starts, with an automatically marked charge temperature. The really nice thing about the software is that you can set a charge temperature as a target temperature, and the roaster will do all the work to bring it up to that temperature for you. This is super useful so you can charge at pretty much exactly what you set it to. You mustn't forget to raise the target temperature after you put the beans in though, even if you're roasting manually. If you get towards the end of the roast and you haven't raised this, when it hits that temperature, it will drop the power automatically and you'll probably get a hard temperature crash. Next, you have the fan speed, labeled smoke, and the roller speed. I almost always have the roller set to 100% for the whole time. There's no real need to have it below that, so it is a little bit annoying that by default it's set to 40%, which is too slow for the beans to move around properly. The smoke comes out through the back over here, and you can easily get an extractor fan behind it depending on where you have your roaster set up. I'm sure even a kitchen extractor fan with a little tube would be fine to remove the smoke. As for the power of the roaster, it actually can go all the way up to the recommended maximum bean weight and still have enough power to get through the roast quickly. It uses electric carbon fiber infrared heating, which can not only get to a pretty high temperature quite quickly, it also doesn't have as crazy an energy draw as you might think, and they do send a second heating element and the tools you need to replace them all in the box. Testing out this power, the maximum I've done on the M6 was 750 grams, even higher than the maximum recommended load, and I was able to get to first crack in under 9 minutes. Most of the time I'll roast just under 600 grams, so I have more control and I can do faster roasts, and fill 2 250 gram bags for selling at the shop with the weight drops after roasting. As you're going through the roast, you have this little paddle that you can use to check the beans and see how the roast is going and give them a little smell. It locks when upside down so you don't drop any beans out by mistake, but it's the only other part of the machine other than the tablet which feels a little bit cheap and light. It still works just fine though, so it hasn't really been an issue for me. Next, you have your temperature probes, one in the front for bean temperature and one in the back for the environment. It sits right here. next to your paddle, and you can push it in a little bit closer so the probe will move closer to the beans, changing how the probe reads. I moved mine a little bit closer and then stuck with it there. You don't want to be playing around with this batch to batch, or you won't know what temperatures to use. The probes give their temperature readings to the Kaleido system or Artisan, so you can see that on a graph. At first, I thought the probe might be unreliable when I saw some of these temperature crashes after first crack, but really, you need to adapt how you roast for this system. Despite being quite heavy, the drum is actually just a cage, so a lot of conventional, or should I say convectional roasting knowledge will not be valid. A traditional cast iron drum will contain a lot of heat within it, so for most roasts you'll start to lower the heat as you come into first crack to avoid a temperature spike that happens when the beans start releasing energy as heat. If you do this with the Kaleido roaster though, you'll probably get a massive temperature crash because there's just not all that much heat retained within the drum cage. You do have a few little metal heat shields like this that come with the machine, but this is just nothing compared to a cast iron drum. And if you're using it as a sample or experimental roaster like we are, you'll definitely need to adjust. Once you're finished with your roast, you get to my favorite part, the drop. Doesn't that just look gorgeous? The cooling fan is pretty strong, and I like that it can cool down the beans within 3 or 4 minutes of the roast if you move them around with the spoon paddle that comes with it. No, unfortunately, no rotating arms on this one. If you're roasting back to back with this, it does take a little bit longer to come back up to temperature than a traditional drum. So as you're cooling your beans, I recommend pushing the target temp above your charge so the drum can come back up to heat, and then dropping to your charge to go to your next batch. And if you get good at switching, you can probably roast just over 2 kilos an hour on this one, the M6. When you're done roasting for the day, you can pull up these gull wing doors at the side to help cool down more quickly so you can put it into storage. I've kept mine attached to the pallet that came on, so it's much easier for me to put it away in the roastery here with the plastic bag that came with it to stop it from getting dusty. And it also keeps the cooling tray right next to the fans. I've also gotten into the habit of emptying the chaff drawer quickly as part of my between batch protocol. I say that, and then I've got all this chaff in there. The roaster does a great job of removing the chaff, but this drawer isn't that far away from the hot drum itself. So if you let this build up, the chaff can start to get too hot and smolder a little bit. This is always a concern with bigger roasters, and I haven't had any fires yet, but I have seen a few embers after 3 or 4 batches without emptying, so don't forget to do this. Now to talk about the auto roasting feature, which might seem like it'll get you from green to brown beans without all the focus required, but the method it uses for auto roasting can be really detrimental to the quality of your roasts if it's not set up correctly. It basically uses the automated target temperature to try and line up your roast with the previous roast curves you set as background. Unfortunately, this can make your roast look a little bit crazy, with ups and downs from maximum power to 0 and then back again. My attempts at using it, even with some extra setup on Artisan, ended up with some pretty strong scorching of the beans and a pretty baked finish. I tried the Ethiopian coffee I roasted and then the automatic roast that followed the curve, and it was like a completely different coffee. I'm open to being wrong about this. Perhaps there are some parameters that can be adjusted very finely to make the swings become more moderate, but I think using a target temperature is always going to be problematic because you need to predict too many ambient variables each day you go to roast coffee. Roasting is part art and part science. You can't just apply max heat and think the coffee will turn out the same just because it's the same color. So what are my conclusions about this roaster? I've been getting some pretty fantastic coffee out of it, and while it did take me quite a few batches to season the roaster and then get used to the power, it has absolutely been an asset in the roastery. I can go as low as 200 gram batches for roasting samples from our importer and try out lots of different and exciting coffees and get some pretty great results on par with much more expensive commercial roasters. The guys at Kaleido have been really responsive in the group on Facebook and are working with our Artisan team now to get the roaster listed so that the setup will be easier. And I'm definitely going to keep on using this roaster for small batch roasting and experimenting with some more exciting coffee, which you can get from me from the link in the description below. So what do you think about the Kaleido roasters? Have you been planning to get one but you wanted to see more about it? Let me know in the comments and give this video a like if you found it helpful. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end, you wonderfully overcaffeinated people, and I will see you on the next one.